I mean, a rave. You may find it surprising." I wiped my forehead. "Surprising in what way, Rudy?" I felt as though he was trying to tell me something without really wanting to say it. "I know you said your dad was writing a book about a priest," he said. "But this book, well, it sounds like a confessional." "A what?" "A confessional. The review says, quote, 'It belongs in the first tier of spiritual memoirs ever written.'" The first tier of spiritual memoirs? What else does it say? My voice had grown weak. I was reluctant to ask, but too curious not to. When my father had first mentioned the book to me in passing 2 years earlier, he had called it a biography of sorts. I should have known to attach more meaning to the last 2 words, of sorts, rather than the first 2. Of sorts was the sort of caveat my father loved to offer. "Just go online and read the review yourself," Rudy said. "You might have something to say about the book. If you do, let me know. I can get you to the right people." The offer seemed odd, but I suspected Rudy knew more than he wanted to share. It was no secret to him that my dad and I had a difficult relationship. I wasn't sure exactly what my husband had told him, but he had told him something, if not the whole story. Rudy had been in the newspaper and magazine business for years, and at one time, coincidentally, he was the Washington writer for Spy, when my father was its editor-in-chief. If he said I should read the review, then I would. Kurt downloaded and printed it for me. "You read it," he said. "I'll go amuse the girls." Our daughters, Julia and Charlotte, were 6 and 3 years old. And so I closed the door and sat down in our playroom office to read a review that began this way. "Saints are perhaps always best evoked by sinners, and it would be hard to think of someone more at ease in the world of modern sin than Tony Hendra." Modern sin? At ease? Did the reviewer really have any idea the nature of my father's sins? The book indeed was a biography, of sorts, about a Benedictine monk named Father Joseph Warrilow. For most of his life, my dad had known Father Joe, first meeting him when he was 14 on a trip to an abbey off the coast of England on the Isle of Wight. Since then, the two had remained friends, and the book told the story of how Father Joe helped my dad, now 62, come to terms with all he had done wrong. I'd met Father Joe twice before he had died a few years ago, and I knew him to be as my father and the review described him, an incredibly special man. What I didn't recognize were the descriptions of my father, of his life, or of the sins that he had confessed. The reviewer wrote of my father's sexual adventures and how none of them was truly sinful. How Father Joe's great gift was to relieve him of misplaced sexual guilt. And I asked, incredulous as I read it, how could my father write about this? About sex and sin and misplaced guilt? Then came the phrase that I could not forget. Tony Hendra, it read, spares us no details of his own iniquities as a parent. I reread it a few times. Spares us no details of his own iniquities? What does that mean? For a moment I thought, he's finally come out with it. But I saw from the rest of the review that, of course, he had not. All I wanted to do was to call this reviewer and shout, "How do you know he spared no details? Oh, he spared you a lot of details, because if people knew the details, no one would have published this biography of sorts." I paced in circles, holding the review in my hand, ignoring the cries of, "Mommy, we're hungry," coming from outside the door. I'd locked it so I could cry without scaring the poor girls who were now rattling the door handle. Finally, I pulled myself together enough to go outside. I had been a professional actress for about 20 years, and though never as accomplished as my husband, I'd met with some success when I first came to Hollywood. But after I had Julia, I focused more on mothering than acting, and my most unforgettable role, as Dahar in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, is remembered less for my acting and more because of the audience. Trekkies who log every character,